Dear friends, dear colleagues, supporters of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our today's presentation. And I also wanted to welcome you to the Bociurkiw Memorial Lecture 2023. Before my dear colleague Heather Coleman introduces the event, let me welcome you also to the University of Saskatchewan. And I apologize, let me welcome you to the University of Alberta. My name is Natalia Konenko-Fries, and I used to teach at the University of Saskatchewan, that's the slippage, but currently I serve as the Director of Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies here at the University of Alberta. I welcome you to the University of Alberta. We are located on the Treaty 6 territory in Amiskwaciy-Waskahikan, or Edmonton, traditional lands of many First Nations and Métis people. And as academics, we work with and learn from our colleagues representing the indigenous nations and indigenous studies. And you know, today, especially in times when Ukrainian people get drawn into the war against Russian neocolonialism and direct military invasion, as academics, we learn from Canada's indigenous colleagues and neighbors even more, as they already built so much resilience and perseverance in their own fight against the legacies of colonial power here in Canada, for the right to prosper and live on their own land. As our colleagues in Ukraine understand this fight very well, we are supporting our colleagues in Ukraine and Ukrainians elsewhere in this particular struggle today. I also wanted to welcome you to the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. We have been established in 1976, and over the course of all these years, now approaching the 50th anniversary of ours, we have grown to be recognized as a global leader in the field of Ukrainian studies. We host many programs and establish research centers, and one of our research programs is exactly the program that hosts our today's event. The research program on religion and culture builds on the research legacy of eminent church historian Bohdan Bociurkiw and examines the role of religion and culture in Ukrainian identity and life waves of Ukrainian communities around the globe. And my dear colleague Heather Coleman, the director of the program, is here to introduce our annual lecture, as well as our esteemed colleague Anatolii Babynskyi, who is going to be presenting today. Thank you. Heather?
Thank you, Natalia. So welcome, everyone. Each year, the research program on religion and culture at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies sponsors the Bohdan Bociurkiw Memorial Lecture. These lectures honor the memory of Professor Bohdan Bociurkiw, who was one of the founders of CIUS and an eminent political scientist and internationally renowned specialist on human rights, Soviet religious policy, and the history of the Ukrainian churches. Dr. Bohdan Bociurkiw began his academic career actually at the University of Alberta, where he taught in the Department of Political Science from 1956 to 1969. He went on to teach at Carleton University in Ottawa, where he founded the Institute of Soviet and East European Studies, which is still there now as the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies. And he served as its first director. A specialist in Soviet politics with a special emphasis on Soviet Ukraine and church-state relations, he was the author of a great many books and articles. His final book, The Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church and the Soviet State, 1939 to 1950, was published by CIUS Press in 1996, and it remains the authoritative work on the subject in English. And indeed, it's widely read and cited in Ukrainian scholarship today as well. In 1994, Professor Bociurkiw's generous donation of his extensive library and archives to the CIUS represented the first step in the eventual creation of the research program on religion and culture. And this collection is available for researchers to visit us and use, and it contains many unique items and documents pertaining to the Ukrainian churches, to church-state relations in the Soviet Union, and it served as the basis for the program's reference library. The annual Bohdan Bociurkiw Memorial Lecture brings to Edmonton a specialist working in the subject areas that preoccupied Professor Bociurkiw throughout his career: religion and politics and Ukrainians. This is usually an important opportunity for a meeting of scholars and the wider Edmonton community. But for the last 3 years, we've held the lecture virtually, first due to the pandemic and now because of the war. Happily, this does allow us to expand our community to anyone who chooses to participate via Zoom. So I want to welcome our audience near and far. It's a great pleasure today to introduce our 2023 Bohdan Bociurkiw lecturer, Dr. Anatolii Babynskyi. Dr. Babynskyi is a lecturer at the Institute of Church History at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. He earned his doctorate in theology at that same university with a thesis titled "The Lay Patriarchal Movement in the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Community in the Diaspora, 1964 to 1989. He has deep ties to Canada as well, having spent 2 years as a research fellow at the Metropolitan Andrey Sheptytsky Institute of Eastern Christian Studies at the University of Toronto while he was researching and writing his PhD thesis. He's also a journalist and a respected commentator on religious affairs in contemporary Ukraine. For 9 years, he served as editor-in-chief of Patriarchat magazine, and he's the Ukrainian correspondent for the American online Catholic news service, The Pillar. Today, Dr. Babynskyi brings the insights of a historian and journalist working on the ground in Ukraine to explore the experience of Catholics during the war. About 10% of the Ukrainian population is Catholic, and in the western region of the country, it's the predominant faith. As a result, Catholics have played an important role in the humanitarian response to the refugee crisis that has accompanied the war, and they have also found themselves at the center of a religious geopolitical debate between Rome and Moscow about Ukraine's place in the Christian world, about canonical authority, about cultural legitimacy. His topic today is "Too Foreign for the Russkii Mir, Ukrainian Catholics Targeted by Russian Aggression." Now, before he starts, I just want to make a quick technical note. Please feel free to use the Q&A function, which you'll see on your screens at the center at the bottom, to ask any questions that you have. And you can ask them both as Dr. Babynskyi is speaking and in the question and answer period that we'll have at the end of his presentation. And I will will pose those questions to him at that time. So without further ado, and that's been quite a lot of ado, I now turn the microphone over to you, Dr. Babynskyi.
Thank you, Dr. Heather. And thank you for inviting me, for having me. It's a great honor for me to speak this lecture and to give this presentation. And first of all, I would like to thank all of you around the world for the support of Ukraine. And I would like to share with you my own experience of the first days of the war. The hardest thing was to explain to my children what is happening. We all were very scared, and my children were also very scared. And of course, they heard the news and they have seen how we are, in panic. But in a few days, my older son, who was 12 at the time, he said to me that he's not scared. And I asked him why. And he said to me that I heard on the news that a lot of countries are supporting us. So we are not alone. That's why I'm not scared now. So I want to thank all of you and to all countries who are supporting our country during these dark times of our history. And a quick note that my presentation is more of the on-the-ground reporting today than an academic lecture. In many respects, what the Greek Catholic and the Roman Catholics are facing because of Russia's military aggression is not their unique experience. Like other Ukrainians, Ukrainian Catholics of both rights are experiencing frequent airstrike alarms. Almost every family has a member who is now in the military defending their country, and many of them have been killed or wounded. The humanitarian crisis, the problem of internally displaced persons, the care of Ukrainian refugees who were forced to leave Ukraine, and post-traumatic stress disorder, which no one in Ukraine can avoid, are what every religious community in Ukraine faces today. Just like other Ukrainians, the faithful of the Catholic Church help the army and volunteer. Their parishes, charitable organizations, and monasteries have become hubs of humanitarian aid and shelter for those who fled the war zones since the first days of the full-scale invasion. Perhaps the only difference in their daily lives is that most of them hear explosions less often than Ukrainians from other regions. For historical reasons, the largest concentration of Catholic communities in Ukraine is in Western Ukraine, so farther from the front line. Therefore, I would like to highlight those points that I think are specific to the Greek and Roman Catholic churches in Ukraine. It includes 3 points. The first one concerns the consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine for parish network of these churches in the occupied territories. The second one involves some internal processes related to the war. The third point is devoted to the position of the Holy See on Russian aggression and the reaction to it among Ukrainian Catholics. Before moving to the central part of this presentation, I would like to illustrate its title with one example from recent history. During the visit to Ukraine in August 2009, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow preached a sermon at the Cathedral of the Assumption in Volodymyr Volynski. It was renamed into Volodymyr 2 years ago. Commenting on the cathedral's history, he said, quote, "It was built when faith was flourishing, when people sought to match faith with life, when people hoped in faith in God, in the incarnation of God's commandments, and when they based their national life on Christianity. But we know it was not an easy story. The church was seized, and attempts to rebuild it according to the foreign cultural and religious models ended with the roof collapsing. And for a long time, this decapitated church stood as a mute reproach for those who wanted to change the life of the people by force, to change their culture, faith, and national consciousness. Who were those who, in the words of Patriarch Kirill, wanted to change the life of people, change their culture, faith, and national consciousness? The Assumption Church in Volodymyr was built in 12th century and has since undergone numerous destructions and reconstructions. One of these reconstructions occurred in the mid-18th century when the church belonged to the Uniate Church, known today as the Greek-Catholic Church. Many features of the Western architecture were introduced into its appearance. Numerous reconstructions have compromised the building's stability. In 1782, when the last Uniate Bishop of Volodymyr and Brest, Simeon Mlotsky, decided to make further changes, the walls failed and the upper part of the church collapsed. It is unsurprising that Patriarch Kirill, who likes to speculate with various allegories, used this example. As Mikhail Suslov has noted, Patriarch Kirill's visit to Ukraine in 2009 was a kind of mapping of Holy Rus or Russkii Mir, Moving from Volodymyr further to the Bociurkiw monastery, located on the border between Volyn and Galicia, where the largest number of Greek Catholic parishes are located, Patriarch Kirill called Bociurkiw mountain the westernmost edge of Holy Rus, or russkii Mir, using the example of the history of the Assumption Cathedral in Volodymyr. The Patriarch tried to show that beyond this border is a territory with a different culture, faith, and interestingly, a different national consciousness, which posed a threat to his ideological project of russkii Mir. The revival of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church in the late 80s provoked a sharp and aggressive reaction from the Russian Orthodox Church, and we can assume that the secular authorities of Russia fully shared their Moscow Patriarch's position. The same negative response from the Russian Orthodox Church was also caused by the visit of Pope John Paul II to Ukraine in 2001 and the transfer of the seat of the head of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church from Lviv to Kiev in 2005. At the global level, the Moscow Patriarchate has tried to make the ecumenical dialogue between Catholics and Orthodox dependent on the resolution of the so-called Uniate issue or Uniate question, trying to constantly change the agenda of this dialogue towards the complete liquidation of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church. According to the head of the UGCC, Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, His Beatitude Sviatoslav, during one of the interchurch forums, one of the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church formulated his claims to him in the most transparent way possible. You should not exist. The Roman Catholic Church in Ukraine was less harshly criticized because from the point of view of the Russian Orthodox Church, it was a church of ethnic minorities, mainly Poles, but also Hungarians, Slovaks, Germans, and others. And it didn't pose a significant threat. However, from time to time, this church was accused of proselytizing, for example, in 2005, against the backdrop of information about the possibility of opening a Roman Catholic seminary in Odessa. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate accused Roman Catholics of trying to Catholicize the south of Ukraine. Neither the Ukrainian Greek Catholic nor the Roman Catholic Church is the largest denomination in Ukraine. There are more than 4,000 Greek Catholic communities in Ukraine, including the UGCC, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and the Mukachevo Greek Catholic Diocese, which is directly subordinated to the Roman Apostolic See, and about 1,100 communities of the Roman Catholic Church. According to the most recent sociological data, about 10% of Ukraine's population identifies themselves with the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, while about 2% belong to the Roman Catholic Church. Despite its modest numbers, the Greek Catholic Church plays a very active role in the social and cultural life of the country, and its leaders enjoy a trust from a third of the Ukrainian population. The communities of both churches are concentrated in the west and central part of the country, which has its historical background. Still, during the years of independence, both churches have developed dynamically in other regions. Russian aggression against Ukraine, which began in 2014, has become a severe challenge for both Catholic communities in Ukraine. Ukrainian Greek Catholics were almost immediately targeted by the Russian propaganda, which accused them of provoking the war. Patriarch Kirill, for his part, sent a letter to the heads of other Orthodox churches. He tried to present the Russian proxy aggression in Donbass as a religious civil war of uniates and schismatics against the Orthodox. It is not surprising that after the relatively rapid occupation of Crimea and a part of Donbass, the life of Greek Catholics and Roman Catholics changed radically. Although the parish structure in Crimea was preserved, these communities are on the verge of survival, not development. First, because contacts between these communities and church centers in the rest of Ukraine are complicated or almost impossible now. And after February 24, 2022, it became impossible to cross the administrative border between the mainland and the peninsula. In 2014, part of the clergy and monastics from both churches were forced to leave the territory of Crimea, either for fear of persecution under pressure from the occupying authorities, or because their right to stay was not extended. Most of the Roman Catholic priests and monks were Polish citizens. Many believers who did not want to live under the occupation also left Crimea. Formally, parishes of the Roman Catholic Church in Crimea and the Crimean Exarchate of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church remain parts of the churches in Ukraine. Still, they were forced to re-register in accordance with the laws of the occupying state, which do not allow religious structures to be subordinated to religious centers outside Russia. From canonical point of view, 9 Roman Catholic communities in Crimea remain a part of Odessa Simferopol diocese. Their head is the auxiliary bishop of this diocese, Jacek Pyl, a member of a bishops' conference of the Roman Catholic Church in Ukraine. Based on international law, the Holy See did not recognize the annexation of Crimea. Still, at the end of 2014, after the negotiations between the Vatican Secretariat of State and Russian diplomats, a separate pastoral district was established in Crimea, which is directly subordinated to the Vatican Secretariat of State. Bishop Jacek Pyl was appointed as a delegate of the district with the rights of an ordinary. Jacek Pyl explained this decision purely as an administrative one, not canonical. It was meant to facilitate pastoral care under the challenging conditions. The occupation of Crimea has become a much more significant challenge for Ukrainian Greek Catholics. Before the annexation, the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church in Crimea had up to 3,000 faithful and 5 parishes, which during the summertime served a much larger number of faithful who came to Crimea for vacations. While the Roman Catholic congregation in Crimea was and is multi-ethnic, and services in the Latin churches were more often held in Russian, the parishes of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church have more vivid Ukrainian national character. Therefore, after the annexation, Russians treated the Ukrainian Uniates as a Ukrainian nationalists, Nazis, extremists, or organizers of the Maidan. Already in March 2014, the rector of Sevastopol parish, Father Mykolaievich, a military chaplain, was arrested for some time. Other priests of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church in Crimea were also interrogated and attacked. Subsequently, 4 of the 5 priests left the peninsula, fearing persecution of themselves or their families, as did some of the faithful. Some stopped attending churches for fear of persecution. At the beginning of the occupation of Crimea, the head of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, Sviatoslav Shevchuk, asked Bishop Jacek Pyl to take pastoral care of faithful Greek Catholics. Jacek Pyl agreed to provide such a care and even said that the Roman Catholic Church is ready to provide a pastoral care to the faithful of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kievan Patriarchate, which was under complete ban. However, 5 Greek Catholic communities were later registered in Crimea under the name Catholic Church of the Byzantine Rite. And in 1917, a centralized religious organization, Crimean Exarchate of the Catholic Church of Byzantine Rite, was registered. As in the case of the pastoral district of the Roman Catholic Church, from a canonical point of view, the Exarchate in Crimea remains a part of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, and its administrator is an exarch of Odessa, Bishop Mikhailo Bubny. But due to the agreement between the Vatican and Russian state, the Exarchate is directly subordinated to the Holy See and is governed by the authorized delegate appointed by the Holy See. Until the February 24th, 2022, the pastoral care of these parishes was provided by monks who came to Crimea on a temporary basis, and as well as by the delegate of the Apostolic See, Bohdan, who served in Crimea before the occupation. Despite the official registration, Greek Catholic communities were subjected to harassment, and in 2016, the community in Yevpatoria was left without the temporary building where they hold services, and later it was confiscated. Other communities have also experienced various administrative restrictions up to the temporary suspension of their activities. It should be added that the religious map of Crimea has undergone radical changes after the occupation. According to the State Service of Ukraine for Ethnic Policy and Freedom of Conscience, there were about 2,220 religious organizations representing 43 religious denominations on the Crimean Peninsula before the annexation. Still, as of 2020, only 900 religious organizations were registered in Crimea, and they represented only 20 denominations. Thus, the number of all religious communities in Crimea has more than halved since the occupation. Therefore, it seems that the Roman Catholic Church in Crimea was able to adapt to the new conditions under the occupation easier than the other religious organization on the peninsula, if we are not considering the Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. The Vatican's position in Crimea was similar to one it tried to implement in relation to the Soviet Union and communist bloc in 60s or 70s, or as it is acting today in its relations with China. The priority is to ensure access to the sacraments for the faithful, and accordingly to ensure the functioning of the relevant hierarchical structures. In explaining its decision, the Holy See emphasized that its approaches are purely administrative and technical and have no political overtones or recognition of these territories as Russian. It is clear that relations with the Holy See are valuable for the Russian authorities. The Russian occupying authorities act for pragmatic reasons rather than to ensure religious freedom. For example, during the visit of several European politicians to Crimea in 2015, the local administration demonstrated to them the extent to which freedom of religion is ensured in Crimea on the example of the activities of the Roman Catholic Church. At the same time, the occupying administration is trying to manipulate the religious issue and create conflict situations which affect not only local communities, but also increase interface tensions between different religious communities in Ukraine. In 2014, the administration of Simferopol transferred to the Roman Catholic community a land plot for the construction of a cathedral, which in 2013 was allocated to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate for the construction of their church. This episode provoked a discussion in Ukraine about the religious situation in Crimea and the delicate issue of the re-registration of Catholic communities under Russian law, which could be interpreted as a de facto recognition of a Russian authority over Crimea. So it's a very delicate question. It should be added that the issue of building of a Roman Catholic cathedral on the territories that was once granted to the Orthodox Church of Kievan, then Kievan Patriarchate, by the Ukrainian state was handled by a Roman Catholic priest who arrived to Crimea from Russia after the annexation. A significant case is the change of the name of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church in the Crimea. For an outside observer, changing the name of the UGCC parishes in Crimea is of purely technical importance. The Russian occupying administration emphasized that the name could not contain words Ukrainian or Greek Catholic. But given the long-standing rhetoric of the Moscow Patriarchate and the Russian political leaderships regarding the UGCC, this change reflects a deeper trend. From the point of view of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church doesn't have its ecclesial subjectivity. but is a part of a Roman Catholic Church. The Russian Orthodox Church, they doesn't distinguish between Latin Church and Catholic Church. The Moscow Patriarchate has consistently emphasized that it would like to resolve all problematic issues in the context of relations between Greek Catholics and Orthodox exclusively with Rome, without considering the opinion of the Ukrainian Greek Catholics themselves. The registration of the UGCC communities in Crimea as a parishes of the Catholic Church of Byzantine Rite therefore reflects the approaches of the Russian state and the Russian Church, how they want to resolve so-called unite issue. Therefore, the model of existence of Catholic communities in Crimea, Greek Catholic communities in Crimea, reflect the approaches that the Russian authorities probably planned to implement in other areas of Ukraine that they were going to occupy after the February 24th. The situation with Catholic communities after 2014 was somewhat different in the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine, where the puppet Donetsk and Luhansk People's republics were proclaimed. The number of Greek and Roman Catholic communities there was higher than in Crimea. The Donetsk Exarchate of the UGCC has 55 communities, parishes, while the Roman Catholic Church has registered 15 communities in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. As in Crimea, the religious landscape of Donbass has undergone radical changes after the occupation. It is important to note that despite certain stereotypes, Donbass, like the rest of Ukraine, is a rather multi-confessional region. As of 2014, the number of Orthodox communities of Moscow Patriarchate in the region was not much higher than the total number of communities of various branches of Protestantism. 762 of Orthodox parishes of Moscow Patriarchate and Protestants had 600 communities. After the 2014, a total number of religious organizations in the region decreased by more than half, while the number of communities of the Moscow Patriarchate remained unchanged. The priests of Roman Catholic Church who did not have Ukrainian citizenship were forced to leave these territories, and at the same time, the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church retained 11 communities served by 4 priests who also provided pastoral care to local Roman Catholics. In 2016 and 2018, self-proclaimed local authorities adopted laws on freedom of consciousness and religious organizations in the temporarily occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk region. They practically copied the relevant Russian legislation defining the privileged position of the Russian Orthodox Church in these territories and restricting the activities of other religious organizations. All religious communities that existed there before the occupation were forced to undergo a re-registration procedure, while the parishes of Moscow Patriarchate underwent a simplified process, and in fact, they were re-registered automatically. In addition, in these occupied territories and also in Crimea, the so-called Yarovaya law was adopted, which was adopted in Russia in 2016, and this law strictly regulated any missionary activity in the region. After the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, several Greek Catholic and Roman Catholic communities in southeastern Ukraine and in north of the Kiev region came under occupation. In the first months after the start of the full-scale Russian aggression, almost all parishes of Roman Catholic Church in the occupied territories were left without priests. All monastic communities of this church located near the combat zone left their monasteries. Women's congregations of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church did the same. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic priests who remained in the newly occupied territories of southern Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions continued their ministry for both Greek and Roman Catholics. Their ministry was accompanied by constant pressure from representatives of the special services, including inducing them to cooperate. According to Father Oleksandr Bohdan, he was induced to tell what people are saying in confessions. Father Leonid Bezunko was induced to transfer to the Moscow Patriarchate. The situation became more complicated after the pseudo-referendums in the territories captured by Russia and after the security service of Ukraine began a series of searches in the premises belonging to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. 3 Greek Catholic priests who served in the south of Ukraine were captured and deported outside the occupied territories. One of them, for example, had to walk 30 kilometers through the gray zone between Russian and Ukrainian troops. 2 more priests who served in Berdyansk were arrested by the Russian occupying authorities and are currently in prison and charged with organizing terrorist attacks. Thus today, according to the head of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, His Beatitude Sviatoslav Shevchuk, there are no Catholic priests in 17% of the territory of Ukraine, which is under the Russian occupation. Despite this statement, the situation in Crimea remains unclear. The delegate of the Crimean Pastoral District, Jacek Pyl, Roman Catholic, was in Odessa at the time of the full-scale invasion and was unable to return to Crimea, while at about the same time, 2 Roman Catholic priests belonging to Ukrainian Diocese of the Roman Catholic Church were expelled from Crimea. Notably, but part of Roman Catholic flock in Crimea took a pro-Russian position, and after the priests who did not have Russian citizenship left, Roman Catholic priests from Russia arrived in Crimea. Of course, the losses of the Greek and Roman Catholic churches after the Russia's occupation of the some parts of Ukraine are not limited to destroying the parish network. On March 15, a Russian tank shot a building of Caritas Ukraine, a charitable organization of the UGCC in Mariupol, killing 2 employees. But it is impossible to say how many faithful have been killed due to the military fighting and airstrikes at the time. Still, the number of believers in the existing parishes of both churches in eastern Ukraine has been halved as the faithful moved to safer places or left Ukraine. In addition to all these tragic moments and losses suffered by Catholic communities in Ukraine, I would like to draw attention to certain internal processes that, although not directly provoked by war, but were significantly accelerated by it. First, I mean the calendar reform in the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church. Discussions about the calendar reform in the UGCC date back to the Union of Brest in 1596 and have become particularly heated since 2014. It is noteworthy that the first steps towards calendar reform was taken not by the UGCC, but by the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which, like the UGCC, maintains the Julian calendar. Somewhat unexpectedly, on October 22, 2022, the OCU, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, allowed individual parishes where most faithful support the transition to celebrate Christmas on December 25th. On December 14th, a similar decision was made by the administrator of the Mukachevo Greek Catholic Diocese, Bishop Nil Lushchak. And since the UGCC has been insisting for many years that the calendar reform should be carried out jointly with the Orthodox, its head addressed a proposal to the leadership of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to create a joint working group that would develop recommendations for synods of both churches. The OCU, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, however, did not respond to this proposal. So in the end, at its meeting, the Synod of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church decided to implement the calendar reform on September 1st, 2023. Later, the same decision was made in Mukachevo Greek-Catholic Diocese. It is possible that for an outsider or outside observer, the issue of the church calendar is not significant and rather technical, since it is only about synchronizing with the secular calendar. However, in Ukrainian context, the calendar belongs to the world of symbols, not astronomy. For centuries, the calendar, along with the Byzantine Rite, was a marker of religious and ethnocultural identity for the Greek Catholic and Orthodox Ruthenians in the environment of dominant Roman Catholicism in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and in the Austrian Empire. Within the Greek Catholic Church, the debate over this issue escalated a little over 100 years ago. That situation was similar to the contemporary one. During the First World War, Russian troops occupied Galicia, which was a part of the Austrian Empire. And after the liberation from the Russians in 1916, Bishop Grigory Commission of Stanislaviev, who was extremely pro-Western, decided to introduce the Gregorian calendar to replace in the place of Julian in his diocese. Despite practical and religious arguments, Bishop Commission also justified the calendar change on a political and cultural grounds, emphasizing that it would be another demarcation line with Russia, or the russkii mir, as we would say today. The Bishop of Stanislaviev was later forced to withdraw his decision under public pressure, and because the bishops of Galician Metropolitan did not agree on the calendar reform. In the diaspora, Greek Catholic parishes gradually switched to Gregorian calendar. Still, sometimes conflicts occurred on this basis, as for some immigrants, the old Julian calendar was again a marker of national and religious identity, a means against assimilation and link to the homeland. Sometimes this led to the transfer of believers to the Orthodox Church or split within the communities. So, but discussions about the calendar in 90s was sluggish. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so the revival of the church in Ukraine, there were no hot debates on the calendar issue. But as in the time of the First World War, it gains its acuteness after the Russian invasion of Crimea and Donbass in 2014. In the wake of the process of decumanization, which is in Ukrainian context essentially means decolonization, in the eyes of many Ukrainians, the Julian calendar began to be perceived as a link to the russkii mir, as it remains one of the essential elements of the Russian religious tradition. Instead, transitioning to the new calendar was seen as another step in Ukraine's European path, on Ukraine's European path. It should be said that the Greek Catholic bishops were very cautious on this issue, and they delayed making a decision. However, by the end of the 2022, the level of support for the transition to the new calendar in the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church reached 88%, according to the sociological data. So this reform was pushed from below. The war also accelerated some processes in the Roman Catholic Church in Ukraine. As I mentioned above, for a long time, this church was seen as a church of national minorities. This was true, however, only for specific regions, such as Lviv or Transcarpathia, which are located in the far west of the country near the border with Poland and Hungary. In the first years of independence, most of the priests and monks of this church were foreigners. But with each passing year, the proportion between priests who came from abroad and those who were already natives of Ukraine gradually equalized. Now, this proportion is approximately 50-50. The most significant portion of Roman Catholic priests who do not have Ukrainian citizen remain in the Diocese of Lviv, which is historically determined, and in some regions in the east and south, where church is experiencing a shortage of priests. Changes also took part in the composition of the episcopate of this church. And it's very interesting that during 2014-2022, 5 young bishops were ordained in this church, all of whom are natives of different regions of Ukraine. So now, out of 13 active Roman Catholic bishops in Ukraine, 8 are natives of Ukraine. These changes were not caused directly by the war, but rather it was an organic internal development of this structure. However, the war partially accelerated and, what is important, deepened these processes. I can give you one exciting example of this evolution. During a religious procession in Lviv in 2016, one could recognize a national symbols of Ukraine embroidered on the stoles. So this is a part of the liturgical vestments of Roman Catholic priests. On the stoles worn by the military chaplains of this church. There was a trident and a Cossack with a musket, with a rifle. The Cossack uprisings of the 17th century are not a positive phenomenon in the minds of Roman Catholics. So this image on the liturgical vestments of Roman Catholic priests indicates significant changes in the environment of this church, concerning their place, or its place in the Ukrainian society and in Ukraine. According to Roman Catholic priests with whom I spoke, frequent funeral services for Ukrainian soldiers who died during the war play a significant role in the self-awareness of Roman Catholics in Ukraine today. Even in those places where people still perceive themselves as ethno-religious minorities, which aren't too many. The burial of soldier, and sometimes these soldiers were active parishioners or ministrants, accompanied by the display of national flags and symbols, promotes a profound rethinking of their attitude toward Ukraine and as their homeland. However, the most challenging, okay, I have 2 minutes, yeah. However, the most challenging issue for Ukrainian Catholics in the context of the war was the position taken by the Holy See. The discussion about the Vatican's position in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine began long before the start of the full-scale Russian invasion. Already in February 2015, the words of Pope Francis, who called Russia's proxy aggression in Donbass a fratricidal war, caused a shock and even outrage among Ukrainian Catholics of both sides and in the wider cycles of Ukrainian society. No less emotional discussions took place in the context of other Vatican initiatives that were somehow related to Russia's actions against Ukraine, including meeting of the Pope and Patriarch Kirill of Moscow in Havana and signing of Havana Declaration. Despite this, according to the Razumkov Center, as of 2020, Pope Francis had the highest trust in Ukraine among all Ukrainian and foreign religious leaders. It was higher than the trust to Metropolitan Epiphany, who had a 44% and Pope Francis had a 45%. The first reaction from the Vatican to the beginning of Russia's open invasion was a brief statement by the Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State, who avoided using the word aggression or invasion and instead used words from the Russian propaganda dictionary, citing Russian special military operation on the territory of Ukraine. In the following weeks and months, the Vatican's rhetoric on what was happening in Ukraine was constantly changing. Already on March the 2nd, Pope Francis called the events in Ukraine a war. On March 13, he used the words armed aggression for the first time. And on March 27th, he used the word invasion. Along with Pope's addresses, there were also spontaneous commands from the pontiff, which have become a feature of this pontificate. In some moments, The Pope's departure from the official vocabulary was perceived positively in Ukraine, as was in the case with the characterization of Patriarch Kirill of Moscow as Putin's altar boy. But the words about NATO's barking and doubts about the expediency of supplying weapons to Ukraine caused a flurry of negative emotions in Ukrainian society. And perhaps the most significant outrage was caused by the scenario of the Good Friday procession in 2022, where during the 13th station, the cross was carried by Ukrainian and Russian women who have been living in Italy for many years, working together in local hospice. Someone told me after that Ukrainian woman had a Moldavian passport. I don't know exactly if it's true. This idea provoked a sharp reaction from Greek and Roman Catholics in Ukraine, including on the official level. There were statements by the head of the UGCC and on the side of some bishops of the Roman Catholic Church, and as well as from Ukrainian society in a whole. The fact that in cases of war, the Vatican adheres to the principle of impartiality or positive neutrality and seeks to be a platform for diplomacy is quite understandable and clear. And we know that the Holy See played a vital role in releasing Ukrainian soldiers who were in captivity. On the other hand, in the context of an aggressive and unprovoked war, it was challenging for Ukrainian Catholics to accept Vatican's neutrality. Russian aggression against Ukraine is very similar to the German attack on Poland in 1939, and in many aspects, the Vatican's reaction to it is no exception. On the eve of a German invasion of Poland, the Vatican tried to mediate between the two countries to prevent war, even at the expense of the territorial concessions from the Poles, and Pius XII believed that war would in any case cause Poland much more harm. And after the German invasion, in his encyclical Summi Pontificatus of October 20th, 1939, the pontiff, without naming the aggressor, briefly mentioned nations swept into a tragic whirlpool of war and expressed solidarity and sympathy for the Polish people. The diplomatic activity of the Holy See on the eve of the war and Pope Pius XII's restrained reaction to the open aggression provoked a wave of disappointment in Polish society. On the other hand, the position of the Apostolic See gave German propaganda a wide scope for manipulation. For many Ukrainian Catholics, the current situation looked exactly like it did for Poles in 1939. However, Pope Francis' position was not limited to mere neutrality. In some of his statements, he tried to give his interpretation of the Russian-Ukrainian war, presenting it as a conflict between major geopolitical players in which the Ukrainian people have no subjectivity of their own, but are only victims of the powerful forces. Such statements by the Pope were significantly negatively perceived among Ukrainians and Ukrainian Catholics, of course, and in Ukrainian society, as they essentially echoed Russian narratives that in Ukraine, Russia is at war with NATO or the global West. Okay, I'm finishing. So the position of the Holy See undoubtedly has its dynamics, and this dynamics is positive, because during these months of the war, many statements have been corrected, such as the change in the Vatican's position on the morality of supplying Ukraine with weapons. We also saw some changes in the Vatican's so-called Ostpolitik, one of which, for example, concerned not so much Catholics, but the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. On February 21st, 2023, the papal nuncio to Ukraine, Archbishop Visvaldas Kulbokas, visited Metropolitan Epiphany. Previously, Vatican had never communicated with Ukrainian autocephalous churches at the official level due to the possible negative reaction on the Moscow side. However, it is impossible not to know that some of Pope's statements did cause severe problems for Ukrainian Catholics, who often found themselves between the hammer of public opinion in Ukraine and the anvil, the Vatican. Thank you. I mean, fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a stimulating and wide-ranging talk. And I think that one of the great virtues of your presentation is to see the war in its long term since 2014, and how what has happened across that time is influencing and what we're seeing today. So thank you very much. So I'm delighted to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please go ahead and write it into the Q&A box in the at the bottom of the screen. While we're waiting, can I go ahead and ask you a question? Another thing that I was going to say that's really interesting about what you were saying was sort of seeing, you're really giving us the how this is experienced on the ground, and I thought that point about the stoles is an example of that sort of on the ground evidence that you're able to provide us with. I was curious, one of the big events of last spring that had major implications for what you talked about at the end, about this question of the relationship between Rome and Moscow and the agency of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, was the dedication of Ukraine to the Ukraine, Russia, and I've forgotten now, Belarus to the Mother of God. Could you comment a little bit on that and how that has played out on the ground?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. I have a photo of those stalls, so I can send you. As far as I understood, this proposal about the consecration for the consecration of Russia and Ukraine to Sacred Heart. Sorry, because my screen was freezing. I'm not sure that I understood well your question. It was about the consecration of.
Yes, so it was about the consecration of Russia and Ukraine to the and all humanity to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and I know that I think that's a very interesting example. I think of this position of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, and so I just thought, could you comment on that and how that has played out on the ground? Thanks.
Yeah, the reaction on this initiative of the Vatican was not so negative as it was in the case of the Station of the Cross, because this idea was proposed by Ukrainians to the Pope. So, as far as I know, that the Roman Catholic bishops of Ukraine, they sent this proposal to the Holy Father, and he just responded on that proposal and decided to consecrate, to make this act of consecration. It was received by the faithful in Ukraine with some confusion. People didn't understand what is the meaning of such consecration. But priests on every parish, they did this act, this consecration, as it was in the whole world, because it was in every country, not only in Ukraine or in the Vatican. So people were confused, but it wasn't so, so sensitive, this consecration, as the case of Station with the Station of the Cross. But there were not many rumors about that. So,
was there any response from the local Orthodox churches, or?
They were asking us, what does it mean? But for them, different Catholic devotions are sometimes strange. So it just, I never heard that they reacted somehow on that.
Oh, I was just interested because
maybe on the Facebook, of course, but not officially.
Not officially. Yeah, no, because my impression is that that's also about sort of this whole canonical territory issue and who has the right to say things.
As far as I understand that, this idea goes back to the to the Fatima. Yes, that in Fatima, Virgin Mary, she said that Russia should be consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mother Mary, and that will help to prevent the beginning of the war. I think that it's a little bit outdated. These Fatima revelations, we have quite other context, but I'm not a specialist in all these devotions.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just curious. And now I have some questions. The first one comes from, or a couple of questions from Frank Sisson. So first he asks, or he says, it has been announced that the Ukrainian Greek-Catholics in Australia will go entirely on the Gregorian calendar. Does the UGCC intend to only change fixed feasts? That is to keep Easter.
I can read myself, and I can answer. Okay.
But I think that the rest of the audience can't see the questions. So yeah. So go ahead.
Okay. The first question is about the calendar. So yes, in Australia, I also have seen this decree that they switched to a Gregorian calendar, and yes, in Ukraine, the calendar reform that was announced, and it will start on the 1st of September 2023. The bishops never answered what kind of calendar we will use. So they refused to call it the Neo or Revised Julian calendar. They said that we are just transferring to new calendar, or sometimes they said that this is a Gregorian calendar. As far as I understand, that for a few years we will celebrate Easter due to the Julian calendar, because we are waiting a decision between the Pope Francis, or wherever, I don't know who will be the next Pope, maybe, but we are waiting for a common decision between the Bishop of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople, and maybe other primates of other Orthodox churches or Oriental churches, because there are talks about the one date for the Easter for the whole Christianity, or for all churches. And as far as I understood, His Beatitude Sviatoslav, temporarily for a few years, we will have this, we will keep Easter as it is on the Julian calendar, or revised Julian calendar. to celebrate, because we want to celebrate Easter with Orthodox in Ukraine. And I suppose that in May, the OCU, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, will announce also the calendar reform. There are some rumors about that. So UGCC, they constantly, and during previous years, the leadership of the UGCC, they always said that we want to move synchronically with our Orthodox brothers in Ukraine. So, I don't know what will happen if in 2025 there will be no one date for Easter. There will be no decision. I suppose that faithful of Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, they will want to switch to Gregorian calendar like Roman Catholics have, because now we see that generation changed in Greek Catholic Church, and most young people they are more oriented to the West. Let's say this way. And I think that they will push our bishops to move that direction.
That's very interesting about generations. The next question is, do you foresee conflict over Greek Catholics asserting rights to the Bociurkiw monastery? A conflict with the OCU, for example?
Thank you. This is a very hard question. I know that some quarrels are happening now about this, some polemics, and as far as I understood from different interviews of bishops of the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church is not pretending for a property, but Greek Catholic Church wants to have a possibility to conduct services in the church, in the church of maybe in the cathedral, in the main cathedral of Bociurkiw Monastery. And I know that in the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, they would like to have this monastery as their own monastery. So yes, I think that there might be a conflict between Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church and Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but I hope that our leadership, both of Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church and Orthodox Church of Ukraine, will have some talks about that issue and will resolve it. But but we are dividing, as we say in Ukraine, not yet killed bear. So the monastery, the Moscow Patriarchate is in this monastery, and I'm not sure that they are ready to leave it. You know, but the monks of the Bociurkiw monastery, they are more aggressive than the monks of Peczersk-Lavra, because this is like a stronghold of Orthodoxy in Western Ukraine, Bociurkiw monastery, and they will stay like monastery Evsgimenu on the Mount Athos, I think. They won't leave the buildings. So
yes, it's such a symbolic space, isn't it? Yeah. Gloria Maidanyuk thanks you for the presentation, and she asks, do you have suggestions as to how to better support a true faith-based peace through change of the Moscow Patriarchate? She has some examples. How we might support volunteers who have the dangerous work of caring for children taken from their families during the war. Are the faithful directly targeted? I'm not quite sure which faithful you had in mind, Gloria, but
I'm not sure that I understand correctly the question.
Perhaps I'll ask Gloria to just write again and try and clarify her question for us, please. And we'll just go on to the next one. Vida Yogelis, and I apologize for my pronunciation of your name, asks, can Anatolii comment on the resistance of the Orthodox to their eviction from the Lavra monastery, or of some Orthodox? So
the question is about the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra.
Yeah, yes, I think so, and the competition about that.
Yes, this is a very complicated question about the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra, because in Ukraine now the whole, maybe in the whole, but the majority of the society are they demanding from the state to ban the Moscow Patriarchate and to free the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. But I know that on the international level, this is a very it's a very sensitive issue, because it connected with religious liberty and the freedom of consciousness. So I'm not sure that Ukrainian state has a plan, the state authorities, that they have a plan what to do next with the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. Because as far as I know, there were some monks within the community that were ready to switch to or to transfer to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. But after the declaration of Metropolitan Epiphany, who said that if you want to stay in the monastery, so you need to switch to the OCU. If you do not want, so you will be expelled from that monastery. And after that, as far as I know, such monks, they decided not to switch to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And now there was a statement from the head of this monastery that they don't want to leave the buildings. I don't know what will happen next, because I think the cruelest thing that might happen is some battles between faithful and the police and the monks. So it's a very, very hard situation now with the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. I think that we can't just throw them out from the monastery. It's Ukraine is a democratic state, and we of course there were a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but many cases of collaboration between the Russian Orthodox priests and or Ukrainian Orthodox priests of Moscow Patriarchate and Russian military troops. But I think that the responsibility should be personal, because it's our church, Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, was banned in Soviet Union, and we know what happened next. So I'm not sure that banning or throwing someone out is a good way.
Thank you. And this touches on an extremely important question, and thank you for that, mentioning the important historical background to that. Gabriela Resnovsky has an interesting question, which will be of interest to you as someone who's a specialist on the diaspora as well. How to maintain unity with Byzantine Rite Catholics in the United States who have been influenced by propaganda and are sympathetic to Russia, saying things like, well, we don't really know what is happening in Ukraine. She says, this was a response I received from a parishioner at a Byzantine Catholic church we attend, and some Roman Catholic Church parishioners are also saying such things. How do we educate them? And would it help to have a joint statement of support for Ukraine from the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church and the Byzantine Catholic leadership?
Thank you. I know that in some cycles in the Roman Catholic Church, but I first hearing that in Byzantine Rite Catholic Church there are the same, influences, that in some maybe traditionalist Roman Catholic cycles that they are influenced by Russian propaganda, because Russia presenting itself as a country which is a protector of traditional values and is fighting against global West, against all these bad things connected with the Western culture. We all know this propaganda. I know that there are some Roman Catholics that are, sympathetic to such propaganda. I don't know exactly the internal situation in the Byzantine Catholic Church, which is of traces origin to the Transcarpathia. I think that how we can speak to them, or how we can deliver information. I'm not living in the US to answer this question, but I think that today in the English-speaking world there are a lot of information about Ukraine and what is happening here. I think I can recommend maybe beautiful lectures by Timothy Snyder in English about Ukrainian history, or his last speech in the United Nations about Russophobia, and where he deconstructed different narratives, propagandistic narratives of Russian propaganda. I think that we can send some links on such videos on YouTube to such people, or to some links to the texts, and doing this way.
Great, thank you. We have a question from a Facebook listener, and that's Father Peter Galadza, and he asks, can you say anything about the desire of a certain number of clergy in the UGCC to omit a commemoration of Pope Francis in divine services? And he notes that, by the way, that the long arm of the Kremlin extends to Toronto. The former director of the Sheptytsky Institute at the University of Toronto was sanctioned by Putin back in April, and later a member of the Sheptytsky Institute Council was added to the list, and they were sanctioned precisely as representatives of the Sheptytsky Institute. So Father Peter says, as a former fellow of the Sheptytsky Institute, you should be proud. But his question is about the commemoration of Pope Francis.
So I never heard that such movement is massive in the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church. I heard different critical thoughts from different priests, but I never heard that there is a group of priests that decided not to commemorate Pope Francis. I wrote myself a few articles about Pope Francis, and very critical articles in Ukrainian, but I think that we can forgive him some of his, maybe not very good and not very well formulated statements. When I last checked the website Seismograph, and they have the whole list of his speeches concerning Ukraine. The last time I checked, there were like 130 such speeches concerning Ukraine. So he spoke about Ukraine, I think, every third day or every second day. And I can tell you that most of those speeches aren't against Ukraine. So they are very supportive, and they were very, I think, good with love to Ukraine, to Ukrainian people. I think that yes, he said a lot of mistakes, and he doesn't understand very well what is happening here in Eastern Europe. He is of a Latin American origin, and he also has this vision of the world that superpowers are struggling and small men or small people are suffering. And he sees Ukraine as this small man, and he put this small man in the focus of his pontificate, and he likes to speak about this powerful people, powerful nations, powerful states, and the suffering of small marginalized people. And he speaks about Ukraine in this way. He doesn't know very well the history of Eastern Europe and of history of Ukraine, but I think that he is a sincere man, and he changed a lot of his views about our country. Maybe he wants to be a mediator, and he was sincere, wants to be a mediator between Kiev and Rome, between Kiev and Moscow. But unfortunately, he doesn't understand that Moscow don't want a dialogue. So summing up, I think that this is not a way. This is not a good decision to omit a commemoration of the Pope in the liturgies, because even after all these, scandals and different quarrels and about different his speeches, people in Ukraine still honor him and still respect him. Maybe not so much as it was before the war, but I think we need to speak about the civil society and Catholics, and I think that within the Catholic Church, still a lot of people respect him, and maybe not all Catholics are waiting for his visit into Ukraine, and I don't know if it will happen or not, but I think it's not a good idea to omit commemoration.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions before we wrap up. The first one is Gloria Maidanyuk has got back to us. So I think what she's asked, she says, is there at present a more effective way to assist reform in the Russian Orthodox Church towards a lasting peace? Is there something that, how can...
Yeah, there was a very, very powerful and very interesting speech of Patriarch Bartholomew just a few days ago he visited Lithuania. And I recommend all of you to read that speech. And he spoke about the Russian church, and he said that this church became a toxic, and the leadership of this church became toxic in the Christian world. And he said that after the war, we will need to help Russian Orthodox Church to renew its church life, its spiritual life. And he said that the ecumenical patriarchate is ready to help to stimulate this revival of the Russian Orthodox Church, because what they did, what Patriarch Kirill did when he blessed this war, so he did a huge harm to the whole Christianity and to his own church, of which he's a head. So I think it's a very interesting question how to assist reforms in Russian Orthodox Church. Of course, first of all, they have to ask for help. Unfortunately, until now, we have only some voices from within this church, and the leadership and the episcopate of this church is quiet, and they still support this massacre and aggressive war. But I hope that the Patriarch Bartholomew is a prophet, and one day there will be a chance to help Russian Orthodox Church. I think that the problem is that Orthodox Church doesn't function as a one body now. So it's functioning as a separate communities, autocephalous communities, and they need to have a real council, as it was planned a few years ago, and to speak frankly and openly about problems of nationalism, about problems of relations between church and state. We can see that this is a very, very crucial topic for the Orthodoxy. And maybe you remember that Cardinal Kurt Koch, in one of his interviews, he said that the topic of relations between church and state should be one of the topics of ecumenical dialogue. So I think that maybe we should start with this on the ecumenical level, on the inter-Orthodox dialogue, also in the dialogue between Ukrainian churches, Greek Catholic, Roman Catholic, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. I don't know if it will exist in the near future, but so I think that this is one of the crucial topics for Christianity, the relations between church and state, because this war showed that what can happen when a church has not proper, maybe not proper relations with the state, not Christian.
This is a major question that we should think about as we move forward in our contemplation of the question of the war and its impact on the broader Christian world. I had one final question from our director, Natalia Konyenko-Friesen, and she wanted to ask about your sense of what public reaction and responses to the calendar changes will be when they do take place. Working as an anthropologist, she knows that there's anxiety on the ground. And can you give us a sense of public reaction and your impressions?
After the announcement of the calendar reform in the Ukrainian Greek-Catholic Church, there were some discussions, but no hot debates on the issue. It seems for me that people were prepared and they were ready for such announcement. I think there will be no problems in the cities, in the big towns. Maybe in some villages there will be some problems, but Synod decided to give such parishes a permission to preserve a Julian calendar for some time, maybe for 5 years or more. We will see on the 1st of September. I think that problems might occur on the personal level, not on the level of parishes, but on the personal level. For example, if someone was baptized on the feast of Saint Basil, and it was 14th of January, and he's a Basil, so this next year, so he will be confused a little bit, and maybe on the personal level, yes. And there are a lot of jokes on this issue now in Ukraine. So because now nobody knows when to cut garbage. When to cut. There is a feast that you haven't. There is no permission to cut something round. It's a feast of John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of jokes about that. But I don't think that there will be a huge or massive movement of old calendarists like in Greece. There are no hints of this now.
Thank you very much, and that is fascinating. And it's always, humor is always a way that you see how people are processing things, don't you? And so very, very interesting to track that as well. Okay, well, I think we have come to the end of our time, and I want to thank all of our audience members for really interesting questions. And most of all, I want to thank our speaker, Anatolii Babynskyi, for a wide-ranging and really stimulating talk, and for answering such an interesting range of questions in the aftermath. So thanks to everyone, and good evening to you in Europe, and a good afternoon to everybody here in North America. And we hope that we can continue our scholarly relations with you and with the university in Lviv. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you again for having me.